You loser and mistake! Dad shouted and asked me to leave because my gold brother better than me. 3 years later, when they heard me on TV, they came to ask money. When I was 17, my father hit me with words that stayed with me like scars. You're a loser and a mistake, he yelled. You're going to be 18 soon. You should already have a job and be living on your own. Look at your brother, he's 25, has a real job in real estate, makes a steady income. He doesn't mooch off us like you do. I stood there stunned. I'd heard the comparisons to David all my life, but this time it felt different, definitive. They weren't just venting, they wanted me out. My mother nodded in agreement and added something about me eating food they bought with hard-earned money. I wanted to scream. I was 17. I was still in school. What did they expect me to be? Some kind of teenage millionaire? David, of course, could do no wrong. He had a decent job in real estate, but they made him sound like a CEO. Every time he visited, they'd gush about how generous he was, bringing them gifts and helping them with their bills. I knew he wasn't doing it out of love. David liked being the favorite. It gave him power over them and over me. He'd always talk down to me, saying I should take life seriously and be responsible. But how could I be responsible when my parents refused to give me a chance? That night, things reached a breaking point. My father stormed out after telling me to pack my things and leave. My mother didn't try to stop him. If anything, she seemed relieved. I went to my room, grabbed a duffel bag, and threw in whatever I could fit: some clothes, my laptop, and a few other essentials. There wasn't much to take, since they'd always been stingy with buying me things. I didn't even get a proper goodbye. They didn't care where I went as long as I wasn't their problem anymore. I finally called my grandparents. They lived a few towns over and didn't usually get involved in family drama, but this was different. When I told them what had happened, my grandfather didn't hesitate. Come stay with us, he said. Your parents are acting like idiots. When I arrived at their house, I expected questions, maybe a lecture, but all I got was kindness. My grandmother made me a hot meal and said I could stay as long as I needed. After I explained everything, my grandfather shook his head in disbelief. They're out of their minds, kid. I hope one day they realize how much they hurt you. But until then, you focus on yourself, you hear me? Those words stayed with me. For the first time, someone actually believed in me. I didn't want to disappoint them, so I went to work. I had no choice but to work hard. I'd always been good with computers, so I started looking for online gigs, freelance graphic design, small coding jobs, anything that paid. At first I was barely making $200 to $300 a month. It was tough, but I didn't want to give up. I figured out how to budget and stretch every dollar to make it last. My grandparents never made me feel like a burden, but I didn't want to depend on them for too long. Meanwhile, my parents cut me off completely. Not a single phone call, not even a text message. It was as if I never existed. I thought maybe David would reach out, but he didn't. He was too busy playing the perfect son, sending our parents money every month and feeding their delusion that they deserved to be taken care of. It became clear that their obsession with money had distorted everything. They didn't care about family, they cared about control. David gave them what they wanted, so he was their hero. Because I refused to fall in line, they saw me as worthless. But I wasn't going to stay down forever. I had a plan, even if it was in pieces. I just had to keep moving forward. Living with my grandparents gave me the space I needed. They didn't pressure me like my parents did. Instead, they asked how my work was going and encouraged me when I made even small progress. Grandpa in particular took an interest in my engineering projects, even though he barely understood half of what I was saying. Sounds like you're building something big, he'd say with a grin. Just don't forget the little people when you get famous. I wasn't building anything big back then. I was just trying to survive. I spent hours every day scouring freelance job boards. I taught myself new skills on YouTube, basic web development, Photoshop, anything that would help me get more gigs. It wasn't glamorous, but it was starting to pay off. One month I made about $600, and I felt like I'd won the lottery. During this time, I also began to notice things about my parents that I hadn't fully understood before. Grandpa would sometimes mention stories from when my father was younger. Apparently, he'd always been obsessed with status and money. When he was in his 20s, he almost went into serious debt trying to keep up with his friends, buying expensive clothes and gadgets to show off. My grandparents bailed him out. They thought he'd learned his lesson, but I guess he never did. I started to put it all together. My dad wanted to live a life where people would admire him without him actually doing the work. And David? He fit the plan perfectly. David's job wasn't exactly glamorous, but he made steady money and knew how to keep up appearances. He was the ideal puppet for my parents' image of success. Me? I didn't fit the mold. I didn't want to be anyone's puppet. Over time, I got better at what I did. I specialized in machine learning and automation, and took every opportunity to learn and apply those skills to my freelance projects. I didn't have time for college. My parents had made it clear that if I wanted to go, I was on my own financially. But honestly, I didn't care. I learned more by doing than I ever would in a classroom. By the time I was 19, I was earning enough to support myself. It wasn't flashy, but I was able to move out of my grandparents' apartment and get my own place, just a little one-bedroom downtown, but it was mine. I didn't tell my parents where I was living. They didn't ask. For all I knew, they probably still thought I was broke and struggling. David continued to play his role as their golden boy. He never reached out to me, and I was okay with that. I hadn't spoken to him since the day I left. But according to some mutual friends, things weren't going as smoothly for him as he let on. The real estate market was getting tough and he wasn't making as much as he used to. I heard he was stressed about money, but I didn't want to lose sleep over it. Then, when I turned 20, something unexpected happened. I landed a big freelance contract with a startup developing AI tools. They were impressed with my work and offered me a full-time position as a machine learning engineer. It was my first real job, and the salary was better than anything I'd ever imagined. $150,000 a year. Suddenly, everything changed. I went from barely scraping by to living comfortably in a 2-bedroom downtown apartment. I was building cutting-edge AI systems, analyzing massive data sets, and being recognized for my contributions. It felt surreal. A few months later, I was featured in a news segment about emerging tech entrepreneurs. It was a short interview, but it made waves. I didn't think much of it until my phone started blowing up. Friends, acquaintances, even people I hadn't spoken to in years were congratulating me. And then, out of nowhere, I got a call from my parents. I let it ring a few times before I answered. I was curious, I'll admit. They had ignored me for years, so why were they calling now? "Mike, we saw you on TV." My mother's voice chirped through the phone, almost too cheerful. "You did so well for yourself. We're so proud of you." Proud? Since when? I couldn't help but laugh inside. I knew exactly where this was going. "We were thinking," she continued, "maybe we could come visit you sometime? See how you're doing." I played it cool. "Sure," I said. "Come by next weekend. I'll text you the address." I wasn't inviting them out of kindness. No, I wanted them to see how far I'd come. I wanted them to see that the so-called loser they kicked out was now more successful than their precious David. And I knew exactly what they were really after: money. But this time I was in control. The weekend came and I was ready. I didn't go overboard cleaning the place, just enough to show that I wasn't the broke kid they thought I was. My 2-bedroom apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Everything was sleek and modern, high-end appliances, minimalist furniture, the kind of setup you'd see in a tech magazine. I wasn't trying to show off, but I wanted them to see the life I built without their help. Right on schedule, the doorbell rang. I opened it to see my parents standing there with my brother, David, and his wife, Lindsay. I hadn't expected him to be there, but I should have known. David had to be a part of the show. "Well, My dad muttered, stepping inside and looking around like he was in a five-star hotel. My mom's eyes widened as she took in the place. "This is beautiful," she said clearly in awe. David, on the other hand, looked tense. He didn't say much, just stood there with a forced smile. Lindsay tried to compliment the place, but I could tell something was wrong. David's confidence had always been his armor, but right now it was cracked. I made a mental note to look into it later. We sat down in the living room and my mom wasted no time. "So, Mike, you've really made something of yourself," she began. "We're so proud of you. And with all your success, you must be doing very well financially." There it was. The subtle setup for the question. I nodded casually. "Yes, I'm doing well. I have a good job in AI development. It's been rewarding." "That's wonderful," she continued, smiling too broadly. "You know, things have been a little tight for us lately. The economy's been tough, and we could really use some help. You understand, right? We've supported you all these years and dash." I couldn't help but laugh. "Supported me? You mean when you kicked me out when I was 17 and didn't speak to me for 3 years? That support?" My father's face hardened. "We did what we had to do. We wanted you to grow up, to be responsible. And look, it worked. You wouldn't be where you are without that push." "Exactly," I said, shaking my head. "That's not how I remember it. But sure, let's pretend you're the reason I'm here. So what's the deal? You want money?" My mother looked confused, but kept smiling. "Well, it's not like that. We were hoping you could help out your family a little. You know, like David does." I turned to David, who finally spoke. "Look, Mike, we all go through hard times. Mom and Dad helped me when I was starting out, and I'm giving back because that's what family does." "Helped you?" I raised an eyebrow. "They gave you everything. Paid for your college, co-signed for your apartment, probably even fronted you cash for your car. I didn't get any of it." David's jaw tightened. "Don't act like you're better than me just because you're doing well now. You were always the one who couldn't handle the pressure." I leaned back, smirking. "Oh, is that what you tell yourself? Funny, because from what I hear, your real estate gig isn't going so well. Word on the street is that you're barely making ends meet." David's face went pale. "Who told you that?" "I have my sources," I said, enjoying the moment. "But let's face it, you're still playing their puppet, aren't you? Pouring your money into them while they sit around watching TV all day." Lindsay cleared her throat uncomfortably. "We've had some setbacks lately," she admitted. "David's been under a lot of stress." "Yeah, I bet," I said, locking eyes with my brother. "Must be tough knowing that loser little brother you used to look down on is doing better than you." "All right, enough," my dad snapped, his face flushed. "We didn't come here to fight. We just thought since you're doing so well, you might want to help your family." "Funny," I said, standing up. "Where was that family loyalty when I was broke and struggling to survive? You didn't care then. Why should I care now?" They all sat in stunned silence for a moment. My father finally stood up, his temper boiling over. "You're being selfish. We're your parents. You owe us." I laughed again, harder this time. "Owe you? I owe my success to myself. To the people who really supported me like Grandpa and Grandma. I don't owe you a damn thing." David muttered something under his breath, and I caught it. "Arrogant prick." I stepped closer to him. "What was that, David? You want to say it louder?" He shook his head, avoiding my gaze. "Forget it." "Good," I said. "Because I'm done. I think it's time for all of you to leave." My mom tried to object, but I wasn't having it. I opened the door and waited. Slowly they got up and walked out. As they left, I called after them. "Oh, and David? You might want to reconsider who the real loser is." The door closed behind them, and for the first time in years I felt a sense of closure. They came looking for money, but what they found was a reality check. The best part? I didn't feel angry anymore. I had won, not by humiliating them, but by living a life they never thought I could have. The next day I went to see my grandparents. They had been my real family through it all, and I couldn't wait to tell them what had happened. As soon as I walked into their house, Grandma hugged me and asked, "So, what brings you by today, sweetheart?" "Oh, I just had a little reunion with Mom, Dad, and David yesterday," I said with a grin. Grandpa raised an eyebrow and motioned for me to sit down. "Oh boy, this should be good. Spit it out." I walked them through the whole scene, the fake compliments, the veiled requests for money, and how I kicked them out when they tried to guilt me. When I got to the part where I called David a loser, Grandpa let out a loud laugh. "Ha! Good for you, kid. That's just what they needed to hear. They'd been living off their golden boy long enough. I bet it stung when they realized you didn't need them." Grandma chuckled too. "They were too kind, really. You should have sent them a bill for all the emotional damage they caused." Grandpa shook his head with a grin. "You know what you could do? Offer to help with the garbage. That's about as much help as they deserve. Selfish people like that don't change. You're better off staying away from them." "Garbage collection, huh?" I laughed. "I'll keep that in mind." As the laughter faded, Grandpa's face grew more serious. "Listen, Mike, there's something you probably should know about why your parents are the way they are. We've never really talked about it, but maybe it's time." I sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" Grandma looked at Grandpa, then back at me. "Let's just say we haven't been on good terms with your parents for a long time. We hardly talk to them anymore, and there's a reason for that." Grandpa sighed. "It all goes back to when your father was about your age. He had this chip on his shoulder, always obsessed with keeping up with other people. He wanted to be seen as successful, even if it meant taking shortcuts. Your mother was the same way. They used to come to us all the time, asking for money. We helped them at first, thinking they'd get on their feet, but it was never enough. They always wanted more." Grandma added. "Their father acted like we owed him everything just for being his parents. We finally drew the line when they asked us to co-sign a huge loan for a business your dad wanted to start. It was a terrible idea. He hadn't done any research, had no plan, nothing. He just wanted money to impress his friends." Grandpa nodded. "When we said no, your father exploded. He called us selfish and accused us of not supporting him. We had a huge fight, and things were never the same after that. He stopped visiting, and when he did, it was always awkward. We could see the writing on the wall. They were going to live their lives chasing money and expecting others to pick up the tab." "That's crazy," I said, shaking my head. "I mean, it makes sense now, but I didn't know it was that bad." "Trust me, it was," Grandma said. "You always had this entitlement complex. And you passed it on to David. He doesn't even realize it, but he's caught in the same trap." Grandpa leaned forward. "You've broken free of all that, Mike. You're not like them. You built your life on hard work and your own talent. That's why they hate that you don't need them. They can't control you like they controlled David." Hearing all this was both shocking and affirming. It explained so much about the toxic dynamic in my family. They'd been playing the same manipulative games for decades. But I wasn't a part of it anymore, and I never would be. "Thank you for telling me this," I said after a moment. "It really puts things in perspective." Graham smiled and patted my hand. "You've done more than enough, Mike. You owe them nothing. Just go on with your life and don't let them drag you down." Grandpa grinned again. "And if they come back asking for favors, tell them you'd be happy to recommend a great garbage service." We all burst out laughing again. I hadn't felt that light in years. The ghosts of my family's past weren't haunting me anymore. I was free, and I had my grandparents to thank for it. About 6 months after the confrontation in my apartment, I received a text message from David's wife, Lindsay. It was short and to the point. "They kicked David out. Things are bad. I thought you should know." At first I didn't care. David had made his choices, lived under my parents' control, and treated me as if I were beneath him. But something about the message stayed with me. I called Lindsay a few hours later. "Yeah, it's a mess," she sighed. "Her parents, they kicked David out last week. Said they couldn't afford to support dead weight. Real estate's been tough, and David doesn't make enough to help them anymore. They just cut him off like he was nothing. David had given them years of his life, handing over his earnings and supporting them at every turn. Now that he was no longer useful, they had discarded him just like they had done to me when I was 17. It was surreal. Karma had finally caught up with him. A day later, David himself called me. He sounded tired, defeated. "Hey Mike. I know this is awkward, but I was wondering if you could help me out. I'm in a bad place right now. I'm not asking for much, just a little to get by." I leaned back in my chair and thought about it. Part of me wanted to tell him to deal with it on his own, like I had. But another part of me knew what it was like to have nothing. I wasn't heartless. I told him I'd send him $600, enough to cover food and necessities for a while. "Thank you," he muttered. I appreciate it." I made it clear that this was a one-time thing. "Look, this doesn't change anything between us. I'm not here to solve your problems. You're going to have to figure out your housing on your own." He sighed, but didn't argue. "Yeah, I get it. Thanks anyway." I wired him the money that afternoon. To me, $600 wasn't much, it barely made a dent in my bank account. But I knew it meant a lot to him. I didn't hear from him again after that, and honestly, I didn't expect to. Then came the real bombshell. My parents called me. I didn't answer, so they left a voicemail. "Mike, this is Dad." The message began. "Listen, things have been tough lately. David can't help us anymore, and we're in a bad place financially. We were hoping you could come by and maybe talk about how you can help the family. We know you're doing well. Please call us back." I stared down at my phone in disbelief. The people who had thrown me out, ignored me for years and called me a loser now wanted me to save them? The nerve was unbelievable. I told my grandparents about it that night. Grandpa laughed out loud. "Oh, that's rich. After all they put you through, they think you're going to ride in like a hero?" "They're desperate," Grandma said, shaking her head. "They haven't changed. They just need another lifeline. I'm not giving it to them," I said. "They're not my responsibility." The next morning I texted my parents. "I'm not interested. Don't contact me again." I blocked their numbers and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I'd allowed their toxic hold on me for too long. But now, I was free. David had made his bed, and my parents had to face the consequences of their greed. I had no intention of going back. The cycle was broken. I had built my life with my own hands, and I would continue to live it without them weighing me down. And that was the end of it.